and welcome to another session of Cop Talk, two Jews offering their views on the news. I'm Bob Cohn, Editor-in-Chief Emeritus of the St. Louis Jewish Light, and with me as always is Larry Levin, the publisher and CEO of the Light, and also Mike Sherwin, our Managing Editor, who is the producer of our Cop Talk programs. Larry, the past month the news has been dominated by the tragic murders of the three kidnapped Israeli teens, and the later kidnapping and apparent murder of a Palestinian teen, followed by the savage beating by Israeli soldiers, apparently, of another Palestinian youth. We had a very moving memorial service community-wide here this past week. Israel is hitting back hard at suspected Hamas facilities and rocket launcher sites, and Hamas is responding with volleys of rockets. Are we at the opening phase of a third intifada?
I don't think so, because I think right now the Palestinian side sees public relations bennies from avoiding that, and probably it's in their own self-interest not to. The maniac Israelis who apparently retaliated didn't do Israel any good at all in the international eye. In fact, you can't even hardly find the names of the killed Israeli teens when you do searches online, because it's all buried behind what happened with their retaliatory, stupid, and illegal act.
Completely right. Israel had the moral high ground for about 3 or 4 days, where the world's sympathy and support was clearly with Israel. We even had a United Nations Security Council unanimous resolution. But there's some interesting contrasts in the reaction here. The president of the state of Israel, Shimon Peres, personally called the father of the murder apparently by the Israeli ultranationalists, and expressed his shame and his personal condolences. Meanwhile, we have from the so-called moderate wing of the Palestinian Authority saying condemning Israel for collective punishment, and also saying in a Fatah release, prepare your body bags for rivers of blood. And I think there is a contrast in terms of the way the two sides process it.
Yeah, and as we talk about in the editorial in this coming week, really what a country's highest aspirations are is really important, and how they exercise the rule of law, especially in times of difficulty, is really important. And Israel seems to be exercising that rule of law, at least to the extent of trying to find and arrest and convict the perpetrators against the Arab boy who was killed.
We also had the 38th anniversary of the raid on Entebbe when Israeli soldiers rescued the passengers on this Pan Am Air France flight in Entebbe, Uganda. And Bibi Netanyahu's brother Yoni was the Israeli shooting victim of that incident. And so he personally hurts from the loss of his dear brother. And I thought, especially since he's such a hardliner, his absolute condemnation of both the beating and the murder of this Palestinian boy were very statesmanlike and completely appropriate. Mm-hmm. So I think I mentioned already the very moving service that we had last week, in which, by the way, Andrew Rayfeld, the Federation president and CEO, included comments about the Palestinian murder victim in his remarks. Now, the Sunni jihadist group ISIS has taken over 1/3 of the state of Iraq with lightning series of raids that has captured major Iraqi towns, including Mosul, and seemingly poised any day now to invade Baghdad. They go back and forth on that. Do you agree with the recent Time magazine cover story and this week that we might be seeing the end of Iraq for good?
I don't know, and it raises a specter about Syria as well, and how far the ISIS group wants to take things with incursions into Syria, with potential incursions into Jordan, which would be particularly destabilizing to the Israelis. I don't know. There hasn't been much strong political guidance at the heart of Baghdad since the United States left, and I'm not sure we're likely to see any unless it's brokered in a very meaningful way by outside parties, which could possibly not even keep Iraq together, but could split it into 3 states, as we've discussed many times in the past. I do think that the United States is taking way too much of a hit on what the Iraqis have been unable to do in terms of holding their own nation together.
I agree, and I think Maliki has become, he's sometimes being described now as a Shia Saddam Hussein, that he is really the chief obstacle to any kind of a political resolution. It's ironic that, and we've kind of talked about this before, when Vice President Joe Biden was a senator from Delaware and active on the Foreign Relations Committee, he and Leslie Gelb of the Council on Foreign Affairs talked about just facing facts and dividing Iraq up into 3 distinct states. At that time, the areas weren't as cleanly divided as they are now by events on the ground. So to some extent, that plan should be dusted off. I think it was good that Netanyahu called for recognition of Kurdistan as an independent state.
Well, and if you think that Maliki is going to drift further and further toward Iran, you certainly don't want all of Iraq to be moving in that direction for the long term. So, maybe the split off wouldn't be so bad. At least you could save part of the country.
Exactly. I think we're also learning another lesson, that the Islamic world, including the Islamists, are not a monolithic group. For a long time, the United States acted as if what we used to call Red China and the Soviet Union were all part of one big red bloc. But they had antagonisms between the two of them that were historic. And you have the Shia-Sunni divide, which goes back to the year 632, for goodness sake.
Can you say red states and blue states?
That's right. And I think, that is a good, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the polarization of American politics is such. We can see a real teachable moment that if you don't learn the art of compromise, if you stop demonizing people who reach across the aisle as the bad guys, this is what you can end up with.
You got to start with the commonalities and build your way up from there.
100%. Yeah. Now, President Obama has sent, about staying with Iraq for a while, about 600 U.S. advisors, 2 batches of about 300 plus, to Iraq to protect our embassy in Baghdad, but he has ruled out any boots on the ground. Do you think that's a wise policy, and do you think that the $500 million that Obama has asked Congress to allocate to provide assistance to the moderate rebel forces in Syria and push back against ISIS deserves to be supported?
I think you got to try. You have to try within reason. And the big challenge right now in the region is, funding the wrong people. We've seen that happen many times in the past. And so I think this administration has been very judicious about making sure that any support that's given, whether it's dollars or whether it's weaponry, goes to folks that you have a reasonable and credible basis for believing, aren't either militant or likely to become militant, or subsumed by the militants. So I think it's a middle ground, judicious approach. I think it's worth it. In this very publication, we wrote a painful editorial about a month or so ago, talking about how, Assad remaining in power in Syria might be the best of the bad situations.
Absolutely.
And we're starting to see with ISIS what we were talking about at the time, because it devolves into total militant anarchy, then that makes life for Israel even that much harder down the road.
We also have the irony of the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I, and the boundaries that a lot of the European powers drew in the Middle East and parts of Europe are haunting us to this very day.
Yeah, everything's either Balkanized or unbalkanized.
Yeah.
You have Iraq, you have the Ukraine, you have, almost every key hotbed area right now undergoing the potential for separation or reamalgamation.
And ironically, even Scotland, after 600 years under British control, might be moving in direction of splitting off from Great Britain.
They may, but then they have no soccer hope whatsoever in the future.
I hope that they don't go that route, although I do like the sound of bagpipes on any kind of a sports field. So last week, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a controversial 5-4 decision in the Hobby Lobby Religious Freedom Contraceptives Coverage case. And I know you plan to write about this in the light. What are the implications of that ruling for the Jewish community and in general?
Oh, it's an absolutely terrible decision on so many different levels. First, people wrongly think it's a constitutional decision. It's not. It's an interpretation under a federal statute about protection of religious activities, number one. Number two, that law relates to individuals, and the court stretched the legislative history to say it would apply equally to closely held corporations like Hobby Lobby, and there was no basis for that. Third, there was no differentiating analysis given that would keep people or companies for making incredibly attenuated religious arguments to avoid regulation from the federal government or states. It was really a poorly thought out decision, no matter what you think of it from a political or a governmental perspective. The dissent of Justice Ginsburg ripped the analysis of the majority to shreds. I just think it made for very bad law, and it was disingenuous law because 3 days after the decision was made, a related case relating to Wheaton College which is a Christian college, was given without opinion by the court. At the time of the original Hobby Lobby decision, the court said there are at least less restrictive means to, provide for the religious freedom of Hobby Lobby. One of them, or of religious institutions, and one of them is to basically sign a waiver saying that they don't have to provide, this kind of, contraception or things that they object to. 3 days later, the court said to Wheaton College, okay, it's an imposition on you to have to sign the waiver form. So it was an utterly disingenuous approach that Justice Alito took Monday, especially knowing what they were going to do Thursday. So it was ethically wrong, it was morally wrong, it was statutorily wrong, and it was judicially wrong.
What do you really think?
It was just plain bad.
But it was the record shortest precedent in history. That it lasted, 3 days?
And they struck it down basically themselves.
Exactly.
And on Thursday, Justice Sotomayor wrote an equally poignant dissent saying, what are you guys doing?
And it was ironic because this Roberts Court, had more unanimous rulings than has been the case for about 50 years.
They did. I'm very ardently in the pro-choice camp, and yet when they issued a decision 2 weeks ago, relative to the protest area in front of a Planned Parenthood in Massachusetts, it was a 9-0 decision. I supported that decision.
As did I.
And I thought it was reasonable under the First Amendment. I took a lot of heat from some friends on that.
As did I.
On that particular decision, and that's okay. That's what debate is about, and respectful debate. But on this one, there was just no rhyme or reason for what they did. Yeah.
Well, we're pretty much out of time for this segment. Do you have any closing thoughts for our readers and viewers?
No, it's a very sad and scary time.
Sure
because things are so volatile on so many different fronts right now, and we just hope and pray for things to get a little more stable.
Good. Well, we look forward to our next program and hope things will be more stable. They couldn't be any less stable than they are at this moment.
Thanks,
Thank
Bob.
you.